In this video, we're going to talk about pruning Clematis alpina, which is a type 1 clematis. I'll explain when you should prune them, how you can prune them, and I'll actually show you two different clematis and I'll show you how I prune them. And I prune those two differently for different reasons. This plant beside me is one of my Clematis alpinas. It's a seedling, so it doesn't have a cultivar name, but it is one of the smaller growing alpinas. A few weeks ago, this plant was flowering and it was really great looking. It's an ideal plant for growing in containers, and I'll have a separate video that will show you how to keep them happy in a container. The plant has now finished flowering and has made these great looking seed heads. They're very attractive, and I could just leave the plant like this and enjoy the seed heads for the next 2 months. But this particular plant, because it's growing in a container, I don't want it too big. So I need to cut this down, shorten it, and then let it regrow. Because I want it about this size for next year. And if I didn't prune it, it would be 2 or 3 times this size, and it would just overpower this whole container. And that's not good for this location. So I've decided I'll sacrifice the seed heads, I'll sacrifice the plant, and I'll just cut it right back. And I'll show you how I do that right now. This alpina never gets any bugs because I have this guy protecting it. I come down fairly low, find the old stems, and just cut them off. Not very scientific. There's so many stems in here I can hardly tell which is which, so I just go around and cut them all to about 8 inches tall. I do have a wire holder in here, so I don't want to cut that. Be a little careful. That's a wire there, I think. And now it's simply a matter of teasing off the plant from its trellis here. I know it looks like I'm doing a lot of damage to the plant, but these are quite tough plants and they'll grow back. So now that I've cut it back, I could take all of this and just tie it up here so that it grows vertically. But I find that if I come by every few days and just kind of make sure the new growth is leaning on this trellis, they grow up here pretty good. So I'm just going to leave it like this. If a few pieces hang over the edge, that's okay too. I'll just leave it like this for the rest of the summer. By fall, it'll be up this high, and it'll be making the buds in the fall. So what I do in spring is I just leave it alone. If I cut it off in spring, then I'll be cutting off the buds, and I don't want to do that. So let it grow, leave it over winter, don't touch it in spring, wait until it's finished flowering, and then you can decide to trim it back. Now let me show you another alpina that I'll do differently. The clematis you see here is also an alpina called Pamela Jackman, but it's a much more vigorous plant than the one I showed you earlier. Its flowers are also a little larger, but it's a great looking plant. The problem is it's just too vigorous. If I left it here and didn't prune it, it would just be huge and cover everything, including the clematis on either side of it. It's finished flowering, it's got nice seed heads on it, but I've decided rather than look at the seed heads, I got to get rid of some of this plant. And I'm going to cut it right down to the ground. It's such a big plant that the easiest way to do this is to just start cutting and find out where it's actually starting. Now I can start seeing some of the woody stems from last year, and I'll just keep going until I can find out where they start. I've cut most of this plant back, and you can start seeing the base of the plant. Now I haven't pulled off all of this yet because I have another clematis beside it, and this is kind of overtaking that one, and I don't want to pull them both off. All of the stems from this upper growth to the roots has now been cut, and over the next couple days this will dry up. And once the leaves dry up, I can very clearly see which is the live clematis beside it and which is the alpina. So I might just leave a lot of this material for a few days and have a look at it in a week from now. I'll be able to tell which plant's which. This plant has been in here for about 5 years now. It's really too big for this spot. Alpinas are generally smaller, and I didn't expect it to be quite this vigorous. So I'm thinking of maybe moving this plant. If I decide to do that, I'll move it next spring. It's now June here, and I don't want to be moving plants in June. For now, I'll just leave it. I'll let it regrow. I'll get it about this high. Late summer, I might cut it back a bit, try to contain it, but I don't want to cut it right back. And in fall, it'll start making buds on the growth, and I want to keep those so I have flowers next spring. Clematis alpinas are great plants, and one of the nice things about them is they flower very early in the garden. You prune them a little differently than most clematis. Don't prune them in the fall and don't prune them in the spring. You have to wait until they flower and then cut them back. And you can decide how far back you want to cut them. I hope you'll consider growing Clematis alpina. Add it to your garden. You'll be glad you did.